Well, hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome to Keeping It Real. It is Peikoff Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Peikoff Wednesday, and we are here to talk about questions and answers from the book, Keeping It Real, this outstanding collection by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And I could not have a better expert, a better friend on hand for this than James Valliant. James, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing quite well, thank you, sir. I hope you're doing the same. You selected some excellent questions for us. You planned the program today, and I must say it's a brilliant follow-up to last week, apart from being a really interesting show in itself, as it promises to be. So
Thank you.
thank you.
I loved your questions last week on the topic undercover objectivists. We answered some great questions in the super chat as well. I hope that today we'll see just that same level of interest, because I see that Equal to Reality, Unsigned 32-bit, and Catherine are already in the chat. Good to see you all. In fact, I'll put the promo out right away.
The hour would throw people off, and it really didn't throw people off. So
yeah, we are on a little different schedule, and next week's going to be a little different schedule too, because I know you've got a special episode planned for that as well. Now,
on online dating, we have a licensed relationship counselor, a couples therapist, who's going to join us, and he has a little more recent experience with online dating than either you or I, old married guys, do. I'm afraid. Right. So I urge everyone to tune in at the regular time next Wednesday, because it's going to be a really cool show on internet dating.
That is going to be I know that's going to be a great episode. I'm actually have an appointment next week. I know you had one this week, so our schedule got changed. Next week, yes, James Valliant will be on with a special guest. Do not miss that episode. We've been talking applied objectivism last week, undercover objectivism. Today's episode, what for? What even for? What is your point with this objectivism stuff? And I say that because how many of us have been the guy who says, yeah, I discovered Ayn Rand's ideas, and what this is for is changing the world, save the world, go to the Tea Party rallies, open those booths, hold those protest signs. I've done all of that. I'm not done doing all of that. I will keep doing all of that. But the bottom line, what is it really for? So James, your discussion with Dr. Young next week, that is going to be another great applied objectivism episode. But I want to jump in this week because we got a lot of people in the chat, so I know we've got you all live. That is so good to see with the schedule change. And I want to get right to question one, James, and hear your thoughts on Leonard Peikoff's answer to this question. Was your relationship with Ayn Rand like an apprenticeship in which she instructed and mentored you on objectivism? Now, this sounds like kind of a personal question about Dr. Leonard Peikoff, but trust me, there is a theme that's I certainly related to. I think all of us are going to relate to today. And Leonard Peikoff started off his answer like this. He said, well, you could say that, but it was not a formal relationship in the sense, well, I didn't pay money. There was no set schedule. There was no particular time term. I wasn't promised any employment skill. I got no degree from it. So it was a very informal thing, as against what you think of as an apprenticeship. In an informal sense, though, and for many, many hours per week, she was definitely, as you put it, instructing and mentoring me on objectivism. As I've written elsewhere, we would have sometimes 10 or 15-hour conversations, 2, 3, 4 times a week, week after week. She talked to me. She corrected what I wrote and what I said. She edited me. She blasted my errors, and sometimes she praised me. Many times I would ask what I thought was a simple question, and she would give a 20 or 30-minute extemporaneous lecture. This went on for approximately 30 years. There's a little bit more there, but if anybody has not yet seen the lecture, My 30 Years with Ayn Rand, it is one of the great works of Dr. Leonard Peikoff. It's not one of his not one of his philosophical works, but he calls it a philosophic memoir, and it is both brilliant and enormously touching as well.
I cannot help but get tears in my eyes by the end of that one every time. But it does have amazing insight into what he learned about Ayn Rand's methodology. Which is a radical revolution in philosophical methodology itself. I mean, Ayn Rand really did think and live her epistemology as well as her ethics. And we are blessed. We really are to have had a Leonard Peikoff. Leonard Peikoff had the presence of mind and had the vision and the insight to devote his life to understanding this lady's powerful and important insights. And there were very, very few people at the time when he started who could really see that. But there he is for the better part of 30 years, having repeated weekly conversations, some of which could last the better part of the day, while he's getting a PhD from a leading university in philosophy, and able to bring his questions and confusions to Ayn Rand. We're all enormously grateful to him who are serious students of objectivism, of course. He had that opportunity, but very few people took advantage of that opportunity. But what he says is really partially true, but also partially something else. By the end of it, they were friends. They were real friends. And he, that part of their relationship is as important as anything else. But for the rest of us, it's that intellectual interaction that they had that gives us the benefits of his insights. Now, all of us don't have to be philosophers. All of us don't have to be that. I had a conversation, I had an opportunity to study with Leonard Peikoff myself at his home and ask him questions. Perhaps not the extensive opportunity he ever had with Ayn Rand, but I had an enormous opportunity to talk to him in private and to learn from him in his own living room. And one day he said to me, "Jim, you seem to understand objectivism and you seem to have a philosophical mind. Why don't you become a philosopher? Why don't you become a philosopher?" And I said, "Leonard, it's too long range for me. You know that the effect of your work is never going to be seen in your lifetime, maybe not even in Kira's lifetime, but you're still working for that end." But he says, "I get joy out of it right here and now. That's why I'm doing it." Yes, 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 I understand. But I need to see the result. I became a trial lawyer. I explained to him precisely so that I could see the results of my action, the ka-ching, the payoff, this guy's guilt, horrible criminal is guilty, let's send him to the hoosegow. I got this immediate feedback of value. He just backed up and he said, "I can understand that totally, Jim." He never pressured me to become a philosopher to change the world. I think that's really important.
I couldn't ask for a better example of the theme that we're covering today.
I
Yes,
thought you might find that story interesting.
it is. And, we've talked before about, the intellectual heir question came up when Ayn Rand designated an intellectual heir. Originally, that was the one gentleman who did her wrong more than anybody else, and that went by the wayside. But then Leonard Peikoff took on that role. And there have been discussions and arguments and whatnot about it. But the amazing thing to me about that, whether Ayn Rand had ever designated him in that way or not, he was her actual heir. He inherited her estate, both intellectual and the rest of it. And that, as he has said, enabled him to live a life in which he could pursue his passion. It can be hard to make a living as a philosopher.
Yeah.
As a serious philosopher, not necessarily just teaching, which you can get a salary at, but he pursued both his education and then went on to write Between the Ominous Parallels and The Dim Hypothesis. But what he did with all of those, as he says, hours and hours and hours and days and weeks with Ayn Rand, is that he gave it all to us. He put it in this book. And if you could have written the Leonard Peikoff story yourself, if you wrote it as a work of fiction, what could you want beyond studied with the greatest mind of the 20th century, and then gave it all to us?
Right. Exactly. My gratitude to Leonard Peikoff is second only to my gratitude to Ayn Rand.
I've heard criticisms of Leonard Peikoff, and we've had challenges within the movement and movement objectivism, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I really could not imagine asking that man for anything more than what he has already done for us. And the big book, sure, but the lecture series, including the ones that you've run study groups on the weekends, it is beyond rich. It is almost too much. And it's certainly too much to ask of any one man.
A wealth, every aspect of her philosophy, every point she ever covered, points that she sort of left open too. He would ask questions, follow up, make the clarifications, and incorporate that into his work. We are so fortunate, as I say, to have Leonard Peikoff, who, I mean, how much more can you ask? He really did cover the water there in terms of Ayn Rand's philosophy. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Yes. And now we get a bit more into that idea of movement objectivism. Well, we're talking about what for? What is this for? So I'm going to go to question number 2 here. Is there an actual movement called objectivism? Leonard Peikoff was asked this on his podcast. Or is it just a philosophy? Or both? And so Leonard Peikoff answered, primarily, it's a philosophy. You can call it a movement only insofar as there is a significant group of people who accept it and who act to promote it. So you might say the Ayn Rand Institute spearheads a movement. I would certainly say that. This is Leonard Peikoff. But a movement and a philosophy are independent and variable across time. Objectivism was a philosophy far before there was a movement. And Aristotle had been a philosophy from the beginning, but was not a movement in the ancient world. He only became a movement centuries later. They were separate. Unquote Leonard Peikoff. Now that fascinates me because the comparison to Aristotle is apt in terms of the power of these ideas. Essentially, we talk about the 3 greats of Aristotle, Aquinas, and Ayn Rand. The 3 A's. Aquinas was a great enough thinker to bring Aristotle back.
Right.
But to me, it really comes down to Aristotle and Ayn Rand.
Well, but he makes an astonishing point there. Plato had a giant movement in the classical world. In the Hellenistic and Roman eras of late antiquity, there was a Neoplatonic movement, and we can even divide it into early, middle, and late Neoplatonic thinking. In the late antiquity, Neoplatonism was taking over. It was a movement. Christianity is just one aspect of the Neoplatonic revolution that was happening in late antiquity. There was a Platonic movement in the ancient world. There was no comparable movement of Aristotle. I mean, he had some followers and stuff. There were people like, even Roman writers like Lucretius and Cicero, who thought well of Aristotle, but they didn't spearhead an Aristotelian movement, which might have saved classical civilization. What's interesting is that we went through a Christian Neoplatonic dark age for centuries before eventually in the 1200s, by the 13th century, there's Aquinas, who you just mentioned. It's only with those later Christians in the medieval period, those what we call scholastics, that Aristotle actually became introduced. It became an Aristotelian movement between, say, the 1200s and the late 1500s. Aristotle took over the Christian world in Western Europe, gave us humanism and the Renaissance, the beginnings of the age of science. Thomas Aquinas became a doctor of the church in the late 1500s, and he basically integrated Aristotle and Christianity as best as you could integrate those two contradictory ideas. So by the end of the 16th century, the Catholic Church had in part endorsed the philosophy of Aristotle. Talk about a movement. So Peikoff makes a really great point. The Aristotelian movement didn't begin until the last 800 years, and it's given us the modern world. In the ancient world, Plato was the guy who had the movement. So a philosophy and a movement are 2 different things.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I think of Hegel as the Aquinas of that triumvirate of Plato, Kant, Hegel. In that, without Aquinas, would Aristotle have been brought back? But without Hegel, would Kant have been applied in the modern world? So that's why I always think of Hegel and Aquinas as the practical men, the geniuses, but who brought the ideas to people in a way that could make Aristotle great again, or could make Kant powerful again.
Right.
Does that sound about right?
It sounds exactly right. It was men like Hegel who gave Kant life. Kant was a lonely scholar there in Königsberg, doing his own little thing. But there were those who hated him at the time, those who loved him at the time, but it was the people who, even people who disagreed with him in profound ways, but were enacting his essential idea in the 19th century. And chief among these, surely, was Hegel. It was those guys that gave Kant real legs, the way I put it, if I can use the analogy.
Yeah. It's maybe Leonard Peikoff will be considered like an Aquinas, although Ayn Rand obviously was very good at bringing her ideas down to earth. There was no need for an Aquinas in that regard.
better than an Augustine was or Plotinus was for Plato. He's better than an Aquinas was for Aristotle. He's better than the neo-Kantians in the 1800s were for Kant. Or Engels was for Marx. Yeah, Leonard Peikoff stands head and shoulders even above those guys, in my view.
Yeah, there are times when I've thought 100 years from now, which who knows, with AI and life extension, we may be around to see. But in the history of philosophy, I sometimes think Ayn Rand will be forever tied to Leonard Peikoff in the academic world, because Leonard Peikoff is essentially formalized objectivism, not for you and me, that's all Ayn Rand, but for the academic world. I think, once this book is fully appreciated, people in philosophy departments will say, oh yeah, Ayn Rand, Leonard Peikoff.
Well, to use Ayn Rand's own distinction, Ayn Rand perfectly covered what she called philosophy for Reardon. I think there's a whole lot of people out there, doctors, lawyers, engineers, ordinary workers, factory workers, truck drivers, who've been influenced by the scope and the integration of Ayn Rand's and the revolutionary principles she has. But they couldn't give you a technical defense. They wouldn't be interested in arguing with other PhDs about the technical matters of philosophy. When it comes to philosophy for Ragnar, as Ayn Rand called it, Leonard Peikoff, my God, that was a three-point shot, if I can use a basketball analogy. He really won the game with that final three-point shot.
Yes. Oh my God. You think, what ifs? If only Ayn Rand could have seen Opar published. And in that regard, I'm going to jump to the third question. But before I do, we've got some great comments in the chat. If you're not already watching the YouTube chat, you need to take a look. Good stuff. No super chats yet. I want to see a super chat. I want to see support for the Ayn Rand Center UK. So if you hit the $ at the bottom of the chat, if you woke up this morning thinking, I've got too much money in my pocket, or you're thinking, or what you're really thinking is, I'd like to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. I want a little more trading action going on here. Please put in a super chat. Any dollars you put to make your comment stands out supports the Ayn Rand Center UK, makes shows like this possible. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the wealth, the embarrassment of riches that we have in terms of objectivist material. But
if we were just talking about the difference between a philosophy and a movement,
yes,
you guys are it. We're it. We're the movement. We're the ones carrying it forth. We're the ones applying it. We're the ones explaining it. If you believe that there should be a movement of objectivism to go with the philosophy of objectivism, I can think of no better way. No better way. I mean, so many of our friends are in Athens, Greece right now, with the Objectivist conference going on there right now. That's a good way. Supporting ARI is a good way. But you know something? Supporting us here in creating a group of informal students of objectivism, a worldwide community of objectivists, I can think of nothing more important in terms of creating a movement out of this philosophy. So please help us do that.
Yes. And that leads us right to question number 3. As y'all contemplate opening that wallet, question number, it's funny because I've shared my personal super chat strategy, because I tend to super chat a lot on the ARCUK and on Yaron Brooks shows on the YBS. And I've had to tell people, well, I actually do it in a very whimsical and personal way, in that I just do it to make my own comments stand out. And I end up giving a lot of money that way. And it is a trade. It is absolutely to support both this organization and Yaron Brook. And for me, it's just fun. So yeah, don't do it if it's a sacrifice, but do it if it's in your own self-interest. If you like seeing your support stand out, if you want to support these organizations, and Catherine is so great. Catherine is often in with the super chat. Thank you very much for that. She's in with $4.99, and we do appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, question number 3, because you can see the direction this is going. And it's kind of I'm going to say a ballsy question that Leonard Peikoff was asked, but he takes it in stride. With all due respect, to whom do you recommend we direct our questions when you are no longer available to answer them? And Leonard Peikoff starts his answer this way. He says, well, I don't know whether that means when I die or close down the podcast.
What are you saying?
And for this one, I found the audio version, and I can tell you in his own voice, he takes it all in stride. He's very charming.
Yeah, always humorous and charming, yes.
Yes. But he says, the only answer is, I think, what you're really directing your questions to now, if you're using the right method, to yourself. You have to figure out yourself what the answers are, and you can get assistance by looking up or listening to whoever you think has a great or the greatest knowledge of objectivism and is available. You have to listen to any one of them if they do two things. They give reasons that on their face make sense, and they are compatible with objectivism. There's a bit more, but I'll stop the quote there because he answered this question in September of 2012. One of the great things about this book is at the end of every answer, it actually says when he gave that answer, because this was over the course of about 10 years. And so in 2012, he gave that answer, and he's absolutely right. And what I love is that since then, if there wasn't enough already, we've got just magnificent volumes. We've got this heavy-duty companion to Ayn Rand, the Blackwell Companion of Philosophy series, and they did one on Ayn Rand. It was edited by God Help and Salmieri, so it can't get any better than that.
Yeah.
And the essays in this book are just magnificent. But my point here is it goes down to the lighter stuff as well. Facets of Ayn Rand. This book was just released by the Ayn Rand Institute online. You don't even have to track down a paper copy. You can read it. They published it in 7 segments that are all available online. We've got magnificent applied philosophy like Alex Epstein's The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And I could go through my whole bookshelf. The problem now is there's so much good content that you know, when you ask, well, Dr. Peikoff, once you're gone, who should we go to for answers to questions? If you're just looking for the information, there's tons of it out there. Now, if you have questions, well, you've got the Austin group get-togethers, you've got the Ayn Rand Center UK meetups, you've got a lot of opportunities, but you've also got this channel. And it's great to see people in the super chat and the regular chat asking their questions as well. So yeah, I kind of miss that Leonard Peikoff isn't active in philosophy, although it's extremely heartening that he's still out there and living his own best life. But yes, there are so many opportunities now. We've got more super chat coming in. Jay Sebastian says, Keeping It Real is my favorite Leonard Peikoff book. It changed my life, and I'm so glad you guys are going through it. Keep it up. Thank you for that, Jace.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you know, applied objectivism actually is, I in one sense, I think the book you held up earlier, Objectivism, Philosophy of Ayn Rand, is one of the most important books that has ever been written. And in one sense, it is the most, well, important in the sense of organizing objectivism. But in another sense, the application of objectivism to life, the cash value of objectivism, which this book covers, Keeping It Real, in a sense, that's the motivation. That's the why. You asked the question for the title of this program, what for? That's the what for. It's living your life, my friends. And what a wonderful, wonderful super chat to get, because that gets right to the heart of this. It's the living of this, your life, the living of your life, that this is all about. This objectivism stuff is all about you having a successful, happy life. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and there's a temptation on my part to say, what do you mean applied objectivism? This is a philosophy for living on Earth. If you're not living your life by it, you're doing something wrong. But this is philosophy. It is very easy to be a little over abstract. So I have every sympathy, and I've certainly made the mistake myself, for anybody who has taken these ideas and said, okay, this is for saving the world, or this is for an abstract philosophical understanding. But if there is any philosophy that is grounded, that is for applying, this is it.
And it provides a beautiful contrast to a very typical situation that I run across all too often. People who are so upset by the state of the world. You know, the politics is awful. The culture is bankrupt. Oh, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And they can't be, it interferes with their own personal happiness. Yes. It interferes with it. What does that have to do with your romantic relationship? What does that have to do with your career goals? What does that have to do with your, choices and having beautiful things in your home that give you inspiration? What does it have to do with your real life happiness? Right. That's the question. And if I can back up a little bit on that question too about the authority, what authorities should we turn to? We are blessed to have Leonard Peikoff, as I started with here. But, Ayn Rand wrote an excellent article long ago, Who is the Final Authority in Ethics? Yes. And where she said, it's no different than in physics or history or mathematics or any other subject. Reality is the only arbiter. One of the great insights of objectivism is that thinking can only be done by individuals. every thought, there's no such thing as a collective brain. There's no such thing as a collective understanding. It's individual to individual to individual. Now, Peikoff devoted himself to understanding objectivism. He knew Ayn Rand. He had that kind of relationship. He has that context and background that makes his work extremely valuable for me. But that's what it is. It's his insight, and it'll always be my understanding. And this is true for everyone, and as a movement, since we're talking about a movement too, I want to talk, one last thought here occurs to me about, people complaining often about schisms and objectivism. This person breaks with that person, ARI breaks with this group. And boy, it becomes a big issue when there's personal splits or institutional splits. And isn't that damaging to objectivism? Look, every individual has their own context. Every individual has their own learning curve. Individuals are going to come to understand it in their own way, in their own process, because of their own context. And they might even be wrong. There could be people making all kinds of mistakes, and it's up to us to use our individual judgments to assess that or not. There is no shortcut for bypassing your individual judgment on each of these matters. But something, whether it's mistaken or it's a new insight, these people who are applying objectivism, we have to think about it ourselves. And even if they're wrong, and this is the way cultural philosophical movements work, it's not that everyone's going to understand all. I know people who've been influenced by Ayn Rand who are artists who don't really understand it as thoroughly, say, as I do. But they're applying some aspect of it, some sense of life aspect of it to their art. So I'd go so far as to say, my friends, that we should expect all kinds of variants. And I'm not saying that there isn't an objective truth through objectivism, or that these variants will be, all of them are equally valid. I am not a subjectivist or a relativist. Many of them will be wrong-headed in some ways. But Ayn Rand's influence will spread out, hopefully, in various ways and in various forms. There'll be various offshoot movements, derivative movements. Expect it. Show me the movement where there are schisms, and I will show you the people that care. I will show you the people that think this is what matters. I will show you where the intellectual debate is happening. If you went in a time machine 100 years ago, you'd see all the divisions between Christianity and the Roman world. And all those splits and divisions and schisms were only showing that Christianity was about to take over the Western world. Or go back 100 years ago, show me all the divisions among the communists. You got your revisionists with Edward Bernstein, you've got your, anarcho-syndicalists over here, and you'd say, my God, look at all the divisions among the commies. They're never going to get ahead. The 20th century was a nightmare of communism taking over so many countries, China, Russia, you name it. Show me where the schisms are, for good or ill. Show me that philosophical movement where there's schisms, and I'll show you the people that care and are thinking.
That is an outstanding point. I don't know if I've ever heard that point made that way before, James. That is brilliant. Yes, if we were that, I was going to use the word orthodox, then I would be worried. But you are absolutely right. And I think that's one of the mistakes we make in politics, is regarding everybody within a movement as the same. We do need to see the essentials that unite communism, but to say what's happening in China right now, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, with cities and skyscrapers like you've never seen, and at the same time, cultural disasters like you've never seen. But to say that's the same as what's happening in North Korea, or that's the same as what's happening in Cuba, or the same as what's happening in Russia right now. No, it is. And so to say, yeah, all the objectivists, we all should have been one happy family is just that would be absurd.
Major objectivist point, individualism, and it starts with the mind.
It would have been a bad sign.
Go and think, and the thinking agent is the individual, and there's no shortcut for that. And some people are going to have new ideas that are wrong. Some people are going to have new ideas that are right. And some people are just going to be doing the best they can. But the point is, there could be all kinds of influence that Ayn Rand is going to have. And if it's going to change the world, must have.
Yes. Now I got to get a shout out. We got more super chatters. Walter Bishak is in. Thank you very much for the super chat. They're very much appreciated. Wes Stewart has a generous super chat and says this: What convinced me that there was something to objectivism was reading works from people other than Ayn Rand. Seeing the clarity of thought it brought to others convinced me that there was something to it, thanks to Dr. Peikoff. Thank you for that, Wes. That's an interesting insight.
Great insight. You know, we were just talking about Greg Salmieri and the late Alan Godhelf, brilliant philosophers. Before he died, Alan Godhelf was one of the most widely published Aristotelian scholars in the world. He was probably the leading authority on Aristotle as a scientist. Or you take the psychologist Dr. Ed Locke. He is the most widely published psychologist in academia on motivational psychology. There are these brilliant minds, these brilliant men that have been out there and are out there who are revolutionizing their fields, bringing great new insight to them. We are so blessed. Ayn Rand's students got it. Many of them got it and have given us this enormous aid to appreciating Ayn Rand. I would not have the depth of appreciation for Ayn Rand were it not for some brilliant men, starting with Dr. Leonard Peikoff, but several others, Harry Binswanger, Greg Salmieri, Alan Godhelf, were all important in getting me there too. So, amen.
Yeah, and incidentally, I'll say as an ad for this book, The Companion to Ayn Rand, this was a really expensive book when it was first published. This is the hardcover copy. This has finally come out in soft cover, and I think even Kindle. So it is much more affordable than it ever was. It's not a $150 or $200 book anymore. This is a winner, and gets into topics. It is academic, but it also gets into topics like, what did Ayn Rand mean by love is the exception making, or we never had to take it seriously? It's all in here. Very, very good select set of essays on Ayn Rand. Just to finish off the last paragraph of Leonard Peikoff's answer to question number 3 here, he says, amplifying what we've said already, there's a tremendous amount now written, a tremendous amount of archives and radio shows and podcasts, not just mine, Leonard Peikoff says, and lectures and books. When I came on the scene, here's why I wanted to read that. When I came on the scene, originally there were a few people and the Fountainhead. That was it. Even We the Living wasn't in print at that point. Now there's a lifetime of material. So you should have a lot of direction and help and insights, unquote. And that's why I mentioned this book, Facets of Ayn Rand. Listening to Marianne Surrey's talking about, before Atlas Shrugged was published, the stories that she tells, again, just a magnificent collection. It's also where the term copper pot objectivist comes from. If you don't know that expression, do a search for it. There are some charming stories to be told, including the original one of Marianne Surrey's and the copper pot conversation.
And all of those pre-Atlas Shrugged objectivists, Leonard Peikoff, the one who devoted himself to philosophy. He got the PhD in philosophy. I have to say, Leonard Peikoff is a hero. Even in that world where there was just a handful of students of Ayn Rand's philosophy and only the Fountainhead was in print, for him to have that kind of insight, to see that Ayn Rand had said something so profound and important, that he wanted to understand it for himself as best as possible, and then devoted his life to teaching that best understanding. There is a superhero. There is someone who stood outside his own time and had the independent vision, even as a very young man, to see the importance of this lady's ideas to philosophy, and to study philosophy and apply it to philosophy in a serious, systematic way. I think we all owe a huge, and one day I think all of civilization will owe a huge debt to Dr. Leonard Peikoff.
Yes. Now I've got to give a huge shout out to Catherine, who is in the super chat, because she says something that I know a lot of people are thinking, and a lot of us have been through. She says, thank you, been struggling with applying. And that's why I couldn't resist doing a show called What For? My last episode of Life on Earth was called What Does That Look Like? Because some of us talk about ideas, but we don't really think about what does that look like in reality. And to Catherine, I would say, I have certainly gone through, okay, I believe these ideas are true. Now, how am I going to fix my life to be more consistent with what I now believe? And it's going to look different. If I know people who are, for example, in some ways handicapped, they can't take on a normal, or I shouldn't say normal, but a regular career. I know people who are enormously intelligent, who should have gone much further in their lives and were kind of paralyzed by the political state of things, and that finally were able to shake themselves out of that. So it broad spectrum, big range. By all means, don't think that you need to look in the mirror and see, oh yeah, I'm Howard Roark now and I'm studying architecture. It's not, it's going to look, this philosophy is going to look like you, but at your best. Bonnie Bertrand is also in with a super chat. Thank you for that, Bonnie. And she puts in the quote here, show me, oh, she's quoting you, James. She says, show me a movement with schisms for good or ill, and I'll show you people who care. And she says, thank you, James.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Again, that is a great point that you made, and I'm glad that's one of the takeaways folks are getting from this episode. A very good point. And again, what is this philosophy for? Yeah, it's for saving the world. And we're trying to save the world. It's why we do what we do. I just don't want anybody to lose sight of the primary purpose of philosophy. And that's why I'm going to jump to question 4. Question number 4, Leonard Peikoff on his podcast was asked, well, what is the root of ambition and passion? How did Roark's ambition and passion originate from rationality? Well, there's a lot in a very short question, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, Ayn Rand will give us the developmental history on most of her main characters. We learn about Ellsworth Toohey's childhood and what made Ellsworth Toohey. We learn about Gail Winan's background from Hell's Kitchen and what made Gail Winan and so forth. The same is true in Atlas Shrugged. We hear all about Francisco and Dagny's childhood. We hear all about Hank's struggle, Hank Rearden's struggle and so forth. So we're given background to understand why these people have the perspective they do, except in the cases of Howard Roark and John Galt. It's as though they are the product of not a personal context, not a product of psychological context. They, of course, they had mothers too, right? But the point, though, is that they appear to be the product of pure rationality. And she doesn't give them a background. We don't learn about their childhoods and their mothers, as we do with most of the other main characters, for a very specific reason. They are the product of not some context, but reason. And with our reason, with our volition, that is the tool by which we deal with our context, sometimes overcoming a difficult context. It's ideas that can do that. But in showing a purely rational person, even if they're ignorant in some way, like Howard Roark has much to learn in the course of the Fountainhead, an important lesson to learn. They still have things to learn, but at least their values are the product of pure thought and not some developmental psychological issue or context. Ayn Rand did that quite on purpose.
I'm glad you made that point, because it's one of the criticisms Rand has received is that her heroes aren't as complex as her secondary characters. In some ways, I find them more complex, but you've got to ask, well, what's going on in the mind of somebody whose train never got knocked off the rails, right? Who is an express, who is a locomotive, who is a prime mover, right, in his own life, who's not damaged.
Right.
And that to me is enormously inspiring, because it reminds all of us we can all get back on the tracks and live a rational life.
And the truth is, we all do have contexts. We all do have, mothers. We all do have situations that we emerge from. That's inevitable, and that's the way it works. You just can't skip it. Now, to the extent we can be John Galt and Howard Roark and be totally rational in where our values come from and where our psychology gets developed, we should do it. It's not to say that reason can't do it. I mean, for example, where does passion come from? I was lucky to have a family that modeled loving what they did. My dad worked so hard, but he loved what he did. And he would come home and he would explain the challenges and the rewards and how much he loved doing it. My mother, she was a mother, but when I became a teenager, she went into nursing and worked when she came back, she loved the medical field. She came back from that hospital. She told you how much she was getting out of it and how much she loved doing it. And I think having that context is helpful in developing a passion, seeing it in others, but you don't need to. I've seen people who came from horrific contexts, did not have a family that modeled, a passion for living and passion for what you do at all. And yet somehow they also, the mind and free will can do it. There are, in effect, to some degree. John Galt's and Howard Roark's out there who, despite their context, are overcoming that context and can still be rational. Those people, they're breathtaking heroes to me. But the truth is, where passion comes from, it's the love of your own life and the realization that you have to support your own life and that there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I remember when my dad, I'd express as a teenager some value that I wanted, and he would simply say, well, how are you going to get that then? What is your plan? How are you going to causally enact this through your own thought and effort to get this value of yours? That kind of lesson, Ayn Rand teaches that kind of lesson. My dad taught that kind of lesson. But unless you live it, unless you actually get out there and find something that you enjoy, right? And that's what you got to do. You got to go out there, find the thing you enjoy doing, and go for it. Yes. That would be my answer to the question.
Excellent. Yeah, and you make the point, there's not just one style of a soul, to use Ellsworth Toohey's words, or sense of life in Ayn Rand's later explanation of that. And it's not that you're wrong if you are a person with a quieter persuasion, or a more passionate outlook, or more of a fighter, or more of a lover, or more. So yes, I always talk about, when people say, well, what does an objectivist look like? I say, well, which objectivist are you talking about?
Which objectivist? That's exactly it.
I'm a Nasir kind of objectivist.
Introspective and quiet. Some of us are artists. Some of us are warriors and extras. We're going to go out and, I look in the mirror. Some of us are going to go out there and fight the battles because we enjoy the fight. You don't have to enjoy the fight to be a good objectivist, to live a successful, happy life, friends.
Yeah.
Find your way, your life, your values, and be true to that. My goodness, if the Fountainhead teaches us anything, surely it teaches us that.
Now, if you needed help applying objectivism and you were looking for, say, the best source, and I say that because we've got a super chat from Equal to Reality, £5, very generous, and says, what is the best book / course that you know to help applying objectivism? Now, my immediate thought is, well, it depends on where you're at and what you've read and what you're doing. And we're talking here about somebody who is younger, well into his career, but a younger person.
You're already familiar with objectivism to some extent.
Yep.
Understanding Objectivism, the course in the book. It was, it's autobiographical to me. That was the one that did it for me.
That was going to be my guess.
I was getting a kind of an idea of what objectivism was. I had sympathies in that direction. I had questions and doubts, though. That course, Understanding Objectivism, cleared it up for me. But I'd already, like you point out, context is all important. I'd already reached a context where I understood some of the basic ideas, at least at a certain level. And so that course really was perfect for where I was at in my context. If you're in a different context, start, of course, with Ayn Rand's novels. Nothing is more, read The Fountainhead, read Anthem, read Atlas Shrugged. That's where you're going to get that stuff. So it depends on your context. It really does. The God Help Salieri collection that you just showed, that's obviously for advanced students of objectivism. So it depends on where you're at.
Right. Well, I'm glad you said that, because when I encounter people who say, well, I feel kind of malevolent, or I'm prone to rationalism, I tend to study these ideas, but they kind of float. Understanding objectivism, that would be the next place to go. But you're right, it depends on where you're at. It really depends on where you're at. Leonard Peikoff, in answering this question about Roark and both his passion and his ambition, says, well, he had to have intelligence, an active mind. He had to be in a situation in which there's enough knowledge to make that choice possible. He couldn't have made it in a pre-industrial age, certainly not in the form he did. He had to have a certain kind of temperament. He would not have been happy being a philosopher. He wanted contact with the physical. He would not have been happy being a contractor. He wanted the intellectual, artistic component. Now, whether you call that temperament or a basic approach, you need to have all that developed from your rationality. And then within that framework, if you've got all that, then it's a matter of focus and direction. That may at the outset be accidental. In other words, it may be that the first thing Roark focused on, the first thing that hit him, was spatial structure or spatial organization. And then he pursued that. It struck him, he saw something, he went on, and it grew. Whereas most artists would undoubtedly have heard only a few notes, so to speak, he himself was fascinated by that and pursued that. I think the main issue is that there's an unlimited number of aspects of reality that you could focus on. If you're tabula rasa, career-wise, now this, again, I'm quoting Leonard Peikoff, how many people come to me and say, or come to Objectivist and say, I want that career, that passion, that single focus, that central purpose, but I have no idea what it is. If you're in a blank state, you're intelligent, the general cultural knowledge is there, and you have a category of what you want and you're looking, well, then a million different things could hit you. If you pursue that focus that you started with, it could end up as a passion and ambition for that field. But then to this idea, well, there's one thing, and I need to find that one thing. Leonard Peikoff says, could Roark have been fulfilled by other careers by the same process? Well, I think so, within limits. Now, I won't say what they were, simply because there's nothing in reality or rationality that mandates this. It's his choice, his fascination. I don't see any reason why, if another aspect of reality struck him and was within the basic framework of what he was looking for. I mean, the union of thought and action. I don't see why he couldn't have gone elsewhere, within limits, maybe some kind of engineering or some kind of inventor. But it's hard to even imagine that now because we think of him as obviously an architect, unquote Leonard Peikoff. And it's in the novel, it's in the story. There's a point at which he's doing, lesser architectural work. He's building, department stores or houses, and he could be building the Cord building. He could be building skyscrapers, the Aquitania. And somebody asks him, Howard, what are you waiting for? And he answers, I'm not waiting. The work he's doing is an end in itself. And that's the great thing about Howard Roark is he gives answers like, but I don't think of you. And there's no subtext. He's being literal. He's not waiting.
Right. He could build a gas station or even when he's just a draftsman and the way she describes, how he's approaching that. The point is Howard Roark is taking on the job that he loves. And if he can be part of it, he loves the doing. As he says, I think more than once in the Fountainhead. I'm not sure if he'd be just an engineer or inventor because he was also a creative artist. So I think Howard Roark, if I'm speculating about it, again, this is fiction on fiction, like we were talking before, what would Howard Roark be if he weren't an architect? I think he would have probably had some outlet for his artistic passion and some outlet for his engineering, building passion. I think he would have had to have both, but there are ways of doing that. There are other careers, there are approaches, or could just simply have a career and a hobby. Folks, there's a near limitless set of possibilities out there for you too, and it's got to be right for you. What gives you joy? What gives you happiness? How does your mind work? Those are the things that matter. And Howard Roark had his values that made him an architect. Those values could have been applied in a dozen other fields, of course. And it's pure speculation because I didn't write the Fountainhead and it didn't happen to Howard Roark, as we've discussed earlier. But the point is that just because one thing doesn't work out for you or isn't perfect for you, keep trying. Keep doing it. You do have values. And if you do care about something, it will become doing it right, doing it well, and knowing you're doing a good job. And supporting your life in that process will itself have this positive feedback effect. Finding a passion in life is understanding the role of purpose in your life too. For Ayn Rand, purpose was one of the three big central values of ethics: reason, purpose, self-esteem. Wow, the three biggest values in ethics for her. So purpose is important, but it's your purpose. And we need a purpose. Understanding the need for the purpose is part of what will give you that passion. Seeing the importance of what you're doing for yourself is part of that. And one of the great lessons I took away from the Fountainhead: find your passion.
Yes. And yes, I love that you bring up reason, purpose, and self-esteem, because that's what the virtue of selfishness looks like. Sometimes we fall into that trap of having a simplistic idea of what self-interest is. But self-interest means be rational for your own sake and have a purpose for your life, for you.
Yes, for you.
And self-esteem as moral ambition, pride as moral ambition. Take your own values seriously, live up to what you want in this life. That's where the passion is going to. And if you can do that, then yes, even if you are in a period of your life where you can't yet be an architect or a fine artist or an industrialist, you're working in that direction. But also this moment, that end in itself, that ability to say, yeah, this is a moment worth living. This is a life that is worth living.
Find that feedback.
That's what I want.
Yeah, find that feedback that gives you the self-esteem. There's nothing like doing a job you regard as important very well. I did that. I knocked it out of the park. I know I don't care what anyone else thinks. I did the best I could, and that is a really good thing. Once you develop that, once you do that a few times, that is where passion really, for me, psychologically, just really, it's the engine of passion. Wow, I want the experience again of having known I knocked it out of the park. I hit that grand slam, and that thrill of doing something and doing it well and knowing you did it well is going to be the fuel for that passion. There are other fuels. My relationship with Holly, she is jet fuel. I know it's different, and she loves me for the fact that my purpose is my own, that I have my own independent goal. You can't use other people for that. You have to find that within yourself. But there's all kinds of sources for fuel. Doing a good job, or having someone in your life who appreciates you and gives you that, what I call spiritual jet fuel that my romantic relationship with my wife gives me. Or art can do it for other people. Other things can do it. I mean, the point is that there's all kinds of fuel out there that can really help you develop this as a passion. It becomes a passion when it all comes together. Believe me, it's like you're devoted to this thing, like Howard Roark was. Something at the time when I was a teenager reading The Fountainhead, I'm not sure I fully grasped. I don't think I fully understood. And now I do. After years of actually achieving goals, I now realize, oh yeah, that was the feedback loop effect that made it into a passion, and that makes me now purpose driven. I know that's the greatest joy in life. Yes. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was my own experience.
It makes perfect sense. The steps toward your goals are also goals. Those steps are achievements. And even if you're not yet doing what it is you ultimately want to be doing, if you are taking those steps, that is what you want to be doing. You mentioned recently Ellis Wyatt and Dagny Taggart are talking in Atlas Shrugged, and somebody's working for Ellis doing some job just keeping the oil wells running, but he's also somebody who wants to be doing something much greater. He's going to be a great engineer. And Dagny Taggart's, all right, this is the place where aristocrats are hired to do the lousiest jobs. And Ellis Wyatt answers, well, they are aristocrats, that's true, but that's because they understand there are no lousy jobs, only lousy men who aren't willing to do them. And that's the point, is even if I'm doing the lousiest job, right, I am still an aristocrat and I am still loving the work.
Oh, Ayn Rand had jobs that she detested. When in the 1930s, she survived the American Great Depression. That's when she had her own early career challenges. I mean, that's when she was setting off on her career. And in the course of that, as trying to be a professional writer, before The Fountainhead came out, and even before her Broadway success with Night of January 16th or We the Living even came out, but through that period, the American Great Depression, she took on all kinds of jobs, and some of them she detested. She really did not like, she had a brief job selling subscriptions to the Hollywood Reporter door to door. Just talk about the wrong career for Ayn Rand. So in that sense, Ayn Rand isn't saying that there aren't jobs that you're really not going to enjoy. No. For her goals, for her level of ability, no, that was not the correct job. She needed something greater than, say, being a door-to-door newspaper salesman. On the other hand, she took that job. She did the best that she could. When she worked at the RKO studio wardrobe department, within a year, she became head of the department. Again, that wasn't her ideal career by any means, but she became head of the department. She got into it. She did it well. She knew it was a step on the road to doing what she wanted to do. And for some people, being the head of the RKO costume department would have been an end in itself, a sufficiently happy career, depending on your context of values, your level of ability, your situational context. For someone else, that same job might have been a perfectly satisfying career. Which is, Ayn Rand was one of those aristocrats, when she was even doing those jobs. Does that make sense?
And would her trajectory have been the same without any of those steps? Coming to Hollywood and ending up as an extra in The King of Kings in a crowd scene, you think, well, that didn't have anything to do with developing her philosophy. But those scenes end up making it into stories like her second career in Ideal, which we now know from the early Ayn Rand, and that ends up becoming larger plays and screenplays like Love Letters and You Came Along, but also Night of January 16th and the courtroom scenes. Well, courtroom scenes, are those going to play out in her later works? Oh my gosh. It's such a magnificent progression. And I have no doubt that even when she was on the lot working as an extra, surrounded by 1,000 other people in lousy wardrobe that they give you for a crowd scene, that she was loving it. She was Ayn Rand playing that part. Oh my gosh.
Well, you can see it in her young face. In the 21-year-old Ayn Rand, who's there in those clips from the silent version of King of Kings, 1926, Cecil B. DeMille, you can catch her face in more than one scene. And she's happy and she's into the part, and she's angry because that's what the part called for. If she's smiling, you can tell she's having a great time. She's loving it. There she is, her dream. She's come to Hollywood from Russia, halfway around the world. She's met her favorite American director, and here she is working on his latest spectacular Hollywood film.
Yes. Bonnie in the chat says, that's the what for. Yes.
That's the what for. She's glowing. You can tell.
Yes. Well, James, an outstanding discussion. I know we don't want to run too late this time, so I want to say real quick, we've got the Daily Objective coming up, not in an hour as usual, but in 2 hours. Make sure you catch that UK time, 6 o'clock, East Coast, 1 o'clock, the usual time, 10 o'clock on the left coast. After that, Lee Pearson is back with The Cutting Edge, and he's doing an episode called Music and the Subconscious. I am very much looking forward to that.
Wow. Talk about taking on a serious topic, and Lee is brilliant, of course. You'll always get insight listening to Lee.
Music and the Subconscious.
Oh, my gosh. And this Sunday, we'll be finishing up for subscribers only. Ayn Rand Center UK subscribers only. We'll be finishing up a Peikoff course and starting in a week from this Sunday on a whole new course. Folks, if you haven't checked out that stuff, and stuff only available to Ayn Rand Center UK subscribers, you may want to. And this may be a good time, because we're going to be starting in on a whole new Leonard Peikoff course that you can catch from the beginning and participate in the conversation that we do have on Sundays on Peikoff courses.
Absolutely. And in case anybody's not clear on how that works, you can become a member by following the link that was just posted in the chat. If you're a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, not only can you watch those discussions that you, James, lead, you can participate in them. It's a Zoom call. You can ask questions, have a conversation about the material. If you are a YouTube member, you're like, well, how is that different? A YouTube member has access to all the YouTube feeds, including some member-only YouTube feeds. So you can actually watch those sessions. And that is great fun to do, especially if you're busy doing other things. But if you want to participate, membership link, that is what you want. So do that. Now, I mentioned Daily Objective. Lee Pearson's The Cutting Edge coming up tomorrow. Well, of course, you'll get the Daily Objective again. And then I am doing an episode of Life on Earth with Jennifer Lionberger, one of the great objectivists and Rush fans. And we're going to talk about the band Rush, why Rush is her favorite band, why that is a band for the thinking mind. This is going to be great fun. And part of a
fan of Rush since the 1970s. There's no way I'm going to miss that episode.
And this will actually be part of a series. I have a few things to say about Rush and Rand and some of the stories that I've heard. Some of these are apocryphal, so we'll see about that. Kirk Barbera recently did reaction videos as basically a newcomer to rock and roll. He was never much into rock.
Right.
I'm going to be talking to Kirk as well about this. It's going to be a series, Rush and Rand. First one tomorrow is called Anthem of the Heart. Make sure you catch that at 5 p.m. Eastern time.
I'm gonna. I know I'm gonna.
And James, I know you're going to have one of the most special episodes coming up next week with a special guest. I will be watching that because I've got appointments where I'm going to miss it. You are going to have a special guest that folks are not going to want to miss. So there is so much good stuff coming up on the Ayn Rand Center UK. James, thank you very much for again, this will be an episode I'll be listening to again afterward, because a lot of this stuff I know, and I'm still at my age working to apply it in all the nooks and crannies of my life.
Me too. Me too. Thank you. And thank you for the wonderful episode. This is really a well done, well planned episode, sir. Thank you.
Couldn't have done it without you folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Support the ARCUK. Get on the Daily Objective in just 2 hours, and we will talk to you next time. Talk to you soon. Thanks. Good day, y'all.
Bye-bye.